Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This happened when my wife and I first got married. My grandfather had passed just a couple months before and left me a very sizable inheritance with a note to make sure I use it smartly to start a good life for my wife and I. My father-in-law owns a real estate company that buys foreclosed houses and rehabs them, and he knew of a great starter home for my wife and I, and agreed to pay to have it rehabbed with the understanding that we would pay him back when we were better established, or after 2 years when we sold the house. So we bought the house, and it took about 90 days to rehab it before we moved in. This is an important fact later on. So we finally move into our house, and had been there about 2 weeks when someone came and knocked on our door stating that they were the Homeowners Association, HOA president, and asked for my landlord's contact information. I explained that we didn't rent the home and that we were the owners, and then they followed that up by asking to speak with my parents. I reiterated again that I was the homeowner and asked them what they wanted. They explained that there was a HOA for the neighborhood, and that I needed to sign the HOA rules and that I owed $90 prorated for my dues, but that they would give me 30 days to pay as a courtesy. However, they needed me to sign the rules right then. I told them I wanted to read and review them first before I agreed to sign anything, and they were extremely pushy about signing them right then. I refused, and they told me that I had 7 days to sign them and explained that they have legal power to fine me if I do not turn in a signed copy in that time. I called my in-laws because I didn't know anything about HOAs and asked them for their advice. My father-in-law got pissed, saying that it should have been disclosed prior to the sale, but sometimes with HUD houses that gets missed. We agreed that the $30 month fee wasn't horrible, especially because they did provide a really nice playground for the neighborhood. So I agreed and signed the rules. There were a couple that seemed a little over the top to me, but I agreed anyway because from my understanding at the time I really didn't have any choice. It seemed fine enough until about a month passed and we had a small housewarming party with a couple friends. Literally, there were less than 8 people there, including my wife and I. The house was small, but it had a nice deck, so we were out back having a small fire using a fire pit one of our friends had just given us, when I heard someone knocking at the door. No, pounding like a freaking cop. I just went around the house and there was the HOA president, his car in front of my house with a yellow police light on top. Yes, I'm serious. I asked him how I could help him and he very sternly told me that I was in violation of the HOA rules by throwing a party outside of approved hours, 10 p.m. curfew, and that I needed to send my friends home or quietly take it inside. I checked my watch and it was 10:05 p.m. I was amazed, but we took it inside regardless. The very next day, I had a letter from the HOA stating that it was my official warning for violation of the HOA rules by throwing and I quote, wild bonfire that was a safety hazard while drinking. I literally hadn't drank at all. Whatever, I brush it off and figured it was no big deal. Flash forward 9 months. We were hosting a teen group devotional for our church one afternoon, and we were playing a game of football in the street. We lived on a connecting street that got virtually no traffic, and only had 2 houses on it, ours and the family across from us, whose kids were also playing in the game. All of a sudden I hear a police siren and see the yellow light flashing. HOA president gets out and tells us that we have to break it up immediately as it's a safety hazard because one of the kids could run over. I was fed up with him and told him that they were fine and that we've been watching for cars and that he was literally the first car we've seen and we had been playing for over an hour at that point. He insists and asks what would happen if an ambulance or police officer needed to come down that street to save someone's life. This was stupid because literally both streets we were connected to have entrances from the main road. I gave in and we went inside. Next day, I get a letter explaining that I was being fined $60, the maximum fine allowed for a first offense, and that if I wanted to protest it, I could attend the next HOA meeting. I decide that I want to protest the fine, but noticed that the fine was due in 30 days, and the next HOA meeting wasn't for 35 days. I opted not to pay until after the hearing, and wrote a letter back to the HOA president stating as such. I go to the meeting and it's literally myself. The HOA president, the HOA secretary, president's wife, vice president, president's neighbor, and treasurer, vice president's wife. My protest was immediately overruled, and I was also charged a $30 late fee for not paying on time despite notifying him. I was fed up, I couldn't take it any longer, but realized I really didn't have any recourse. About 5 months later, we gave birth to our first child, and about a month after that I was driving home one night. I was working a second job in retail at the time, and my buddy in the military called me. He had been deployed when my daughter was born and was calling to congratulate me. When I got home, I didn't want to risk waking up my sleeping newborn daughter, so I just sat in my car with the engine running as it was a little chilly outside. I sat there for about half an hour when I heard the police siren and saw the yellow lights. Now keep in mind, police sirens aren't quiet, and this was right in front of my house. His stupid yellow light was flashing everywhere, including into my daughter's bedroom. I got out of the car and rather rudely told him to turn off the light as to not wake my daughter. He explained that I looked suspicious sitting in my car with it running outside of my house. I explained the situation and he told me I had to go inside and that my history of being a troublemaker wouldn't grant me any leniency. I basically told him where I thought he could go and proceeded to sit on the hood of my car. He sat there for another 15 minutes telling me I needed to go in and at one point touched my shoulder. I explained to him that if he touched me again, I would take it as a sign of aggression and defend myself, which he responded by getting in his car and leaving. He circled the block about 4 times the next 30 minutes, which was when I got too cold to stay out and finally went inside. Next day, I get a hand-delivered letter from him and the vice president, and he also asks me to step outside to talk about last night's incident. He explains that he was being nice by not calling the police on me after I threatened him, at which point I cut him off and told him that he needed to get off my property before I called the police on him for trespassing. I read the letter and saw that he was giving me 2 different fines for $180 each, which were the maximum amounts. One for violating curfew, and one for disobeying the night watchman. I was done. I had reached my breaking point. This is where the revenge comes in. I start looking into HOA laws and regulations regarding fines and how to protest them because I felt like this was clearly abuse. I find that the law states that you must be notified of an HOA 10 days prior to closing on a house and must be served with the HOA rules within 45 days of purchase, or you are not subject to being forced to participate in the HOA. I remember that we weren't served until after we moved in, which was close to 90 days after we closed. So I called my real estate agent, who is a very close family friend. My in-laws have bought literally thousands of houses from her over the past 35 years, and asked if she had the paperwork still, and she said she can get me a copy. I looked, and it was over 90 days after purchase that we were notified, and there was no disclosure statement at closing. Relator says she must have misplaced it because it's required by law to be provided prior to the sale, and basically that she wouldn't miss something like that because it comes to her when they do a title inspect on the house whether or not there is a registered HOA. She does a little digging and calls me back 2 days later and says that my neighborhood doesn't have an HOA registered with the city or county, which is required. I end up calling the county office in charge of registering and give them the neighborhood name, and she says that our neighborhood is registered in the other city and not in our city, and that if we wanted to start an HOA, we would have to follow these certain steps, and that without those, the HOA wouldn't be allowed to collect any money or have any authority. Apparently, what had happened was our neighborhood was originally all in one city, but when the city lines changes, the neighborhood was split in half. The other neighborhood kept the HOA that was registered, and our HOA president was supposed to register with the state, but didn't feel like jumping through all of the hoops that it required. I was ready to walk down to the president's house and rip into him, but decided to be smart for a minute. I talked to my neighbor across the street, who also hated the HOA, and told him what I found out. He was furious about it as well. We talked to a few more and get a group of about 10 of us together that agree we need to show up at the next HOA meeting. Word had apparently spread because there ended up being more people than the library meeting room could host. I had specifically asked to be the speaker for the group, which they were nice enough to let me do. The president tried to prevent me from speaking due to being overdue on my fines. At this point, I'm about 3 weeks late on my last set of fines with a $30/week penalty on each fine, so my current bill is set to about $540, but I spoke anyway. I explained to them that I had contacted my in-laws attorney, also a family friend, who had drafted together a lawsuit regarding the fact they were impersonating a registered HOA in order to collect money from us, which was fraud. The president dismissed me and said I had no idea what I was talking about, and that he had had enough of my antics. The staff members all left immediately while the rest of us stayed and talked. A month later, we served them formally, myself and 20 other homeowners, suing them for all fines and HOA dues we had paid, to the tune of approximately $50,000 as some of these families had been there over 10 years. The president and vice president got their own attorney who attempted to legitimatize the HOA, but it required the signature of like 90% of the homeowners. They got 3 signatures, including the 2 of themselves. Some other old bitter hag signed. After that failed, they tried to settle by agreeing to abolish the HOA and showed that they hadn't financially gained from it and that all funds had been used for the park upkeep, snow removal, and other neighborhood events. We took a vote and this was turned down in overwhelming fashion. I was surprised I actually voted to accept this. Then about a week later, one of the other families calls and mentions something about the park maintenance and snow removal. Apparently, he had given a quote to do the landscaping for the park, cutting the grass, mulching, etc., and his quote had been a couple $100 cheaper than what they were paying, and that it had always bothered him because the person that did those jobs was the vice president's son, and that what they were paying him was pretty outrageous in terms of what's standard. Eventually, it went to court, where the judge looked at everything and mandated that they pay $21,000, $1,000 per homeowner, plus attorney and court fees, which were like another $2,000 for a total of $23,000 in damages. Additionally, they were fined by the city's governing body after it was reported. I don't know how much that fine was, though. We ended up selling the house that following summer, but I talked to a couple friends that still lived there about a year after it, and they said that the president and vice president both sold their houses and moved away because they were pretty much hated by everyone in the neighborhood, and that they had an informal HOA that people donated to for upkeep of the park. The next one is an entitled people story. As an immigrant from South Korea, it's not always easy to fit in with the locals, especially when it comes to finding the perfect spot for my favorite pastime, fishing. However, after years of living in the United States, I've learned how to navigate these situations and find the perfect spot for myself and my son, Hyun. One Sunday morning, as we were packing up our fishing gear, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement in the air. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the waves were calm and inviting. It was the perfect day for fishing. As we walked down the beach, we noticed a woman setting up her beach chair in the exact spot where we usually fish. I tried to ignore her, thinking that she would eventually move, but as we started to set up our gear, she approached us. "Excuse me, this is my spot," she said with a stern look on her face. "You'll have to find somewhere else to fish." I was taken aback by her audacity. This was a public beach, and we had just as much right to fish there as she did. I tried to reason with her, but she was not interested in listening. She kept repeating that this was her spot and that we needed to move. I could see that Hyun was getting upset, so I decided to pack up our gear and move down the beach. As we walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anger and frustration. This woman had no right to bully us and make us feel unwelcome in a public space. As we started fishing in our new spot, I noticed the woman had called the police. I could hear her yelling into her phone, claiming that we were trespassing on her property and stealing her fish. I was incredulous. How could someone be so entitled and ignorant? Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived on the scene. The woman started to cry and told the officers that we had been harassing her and stealing her fish. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I explained to the officers that we were simply fishing in a public space and that we had not done anything wrong. I showed them the fish we had caught and told them that we were not interested in causing any trouble. The officers seemed to understand our situation and asked the woman to leave us alone. However, as we were packing up our gear to leave, the woman approached us again. This time she was more aggressive and started to push Hyun. I could feel my blood boiling, and I knew that I had to do something to protect my son. I called out for help, and thankfully a group of beachgoers came to our aid. They stood up to the woman and asked her to leave us alone. She eventually backed off and left the beach, but the incident left me feeling shaken and angry. Update: after the incident, I decided to file a complaint with the local authorities. I wanted to make sure that this woman would never be able to harass another family again. I also started a petition to raise awareness about the importance of respecting public spaces and treating everyone with kindness and respect. Thankfully, the local community rallied behind us, and the petition gained a lot of traction. The woman was eventually banned from the beach, and we were able to fish in peace without any more incidents. However, this experience taught me a valuable lesson about standing up for myself and my family. No one should ever feel unwelcome or harassed in a public space, and it's up to all of us to make sure that everyone feels safe and welcome in these spaces. I also learned the power of community and how standing together can create real change. In the months following the incident, I made it a point to get more involved in my local community. I attended town hall meetings, volunteered for local charities, and started participating in community events. Through these experiences, I met so many incredible people and found a sense of belonging that I had never felt before. Hyun also benefited from these experiences. He became more confident and outgoing, and he made many new friends. I could see how much he had grown since the incident on the beach, and it filled me with pride. However, our newfound sense of security was short-lived. One day, as I was walking home from the grocery store, I noticed the same woman who had harassed us on the beach. She was walking towards me, and I could see the anger in her eyes. "Hey, you!" she yelled as she approached me. "You got me banned from the beach, and now I can't even swim. Do you know how much that means to me?" I tried to walk away, but she grabbed my arm and pulled me back. I could feel her nails digging into my skin, and I knew that I was in trouble. I tried to call out for help, but she covered my mouth and told me to be quiet. As she continued to hold me captive, I could feel my fear turning into anger. How could someone be so entitled and cruel? I knew that I had to fight back and show her that I was not afraid. I kicked her in the stomach and broke free from her grasp. I ran as fast as I could to the nearest police station and reported the incident. The officers took my statement and promised to investigate the matter. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with anxiety and fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that she would come after me again, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder. However, with the support of my community and the local authorities, I was eventually able to overcome my fear and move on. Today, I continue to fish on the beach with Hyun, and we feel safe and welcome. The incident with Karen taught us a valuable lesson about the importance of standing up for ourselves and others, and we will never forget the power of community and resilience. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened a couple of years ago when I was about 13 or 14. I'm 16 now. But I just thought about it. I used to have a piggy bank that counted the change as I put the coins in there. And I remember I had around $60 worth of change in the bank, and I had left it on my dresser once because my mom was going to take me to Walmart to trade it for cash after school. When I came back from school, the bank was gone, and I asked my mom about it, and she told me my stepdad cashed it out himself, and that he would give me the cash back, and I was like, okay. About 2 weeks went by, and I never got the cash back, so I started asking about it, and my mom said he kept the cash because it made up for all the haircuts and gifts he had gotten me. So one day, when he came home from work, we were going to have a BBQ anyway, so he was outside and he had his wallet and phone on the table outside. He carries a lot of cash, so I waited for him to go back inside, and I took $200 from his wallet and went back inside to my room, and I hid it in my sock drawer. I remember him asking me and my mom what happened to the money, and my mom didn't believe that I would steal from him, so she just said that the wind probably blew it away because his wallet was outside. My middle school was right beside a shopping center that had Starbucks, Chick-fil-A, and Wendy's, so every day when the bus would drop me off, I would go to any of those places for breakfast until my $200 ran out. The next one is an entitled people story. I, 27F, have a cousin, 26F, with whom I had a remarkably close relationship. We were like sisters. However, she was responsible for incidents that made me reconsider our relationship. In 2012, when I was 16, she gave me a strong relaxer that caused me to cut off 14 inches of hair. For context, I used to relax my hair, and it was always soft or regular since I have fine hair. She did this because she started dating my ex, who would not stop talking about my hair or my natural beauty. She stole my friends and possible boyfriends, turned family members against me, rubbed in my face that she was my grandmother's favorite, made fun of me for going back to my curly hair, mocked me for losing my older brother, slept with my ex while on the process of moving together, made a post on Facebook mocking me for giving birth to my dead baby while 7 months pregnant, left threatening notes and a voodoo doll on my car. I can keep going, but I do not want to make this any longer by explaining how messed up she is. I tried to get a restraining order against her, but the police thought I did not have enough evidence. I had texts of her admitting to doing it, but it was not enough. Or as one police officer told me, it could be faked. So I blocked her from all my social media and blocked her number. The only times I would see her were at family gatherings, but I would avoid her since I did not want her situation in my life, or avoid her not to have my mental health triggered by her. In June, she got engaged to my ex, 33M, and I found out from family members. My aunt was celebrating her anniversary with a BBQ, and I knew I would see her. I was having an enjoyable time, but when one of my aunts asked her how the wedding planning was going, she couldn't help but brag that it was good, and now she had an announcement. She looked at me with a devilish smile and asked me in front of everyone if I wanted to be her maid of honor, since thanks to me they both met. I was cold and told her no. She whined about why not, and all I gave her was a look. She said that it was time for me to put effort into fixing our sister-cousin relationship. I laughed and told her that by the time she was having her wedding, I would be in college finals and after that, on a month-long trip for my anniversary. I said it was better than seeing two clowns getting married. I also told her the reasons I said no, plus the little spoiled girl wants a Christmas wedding. She started crying and yelled that if I didn't do this, I was not invited to the wedding. I looked at her and said, "Fine by me," and walked away, leaving her with a surprised Pikachu face. I have not spoken to her since that day, but all my family members support me since they all saw how much of a horrible person she is. The next one is an entitled parent story. My EF called a couple of days ago and demanded that my daughter's name have my maiden name. For context, I am ethnically Filipino, but a second-generation immigrant, as I immigrated when I was 6 years old. Filipino tradition is such that the child's middle name must be the mother's maiden name. For example, my mother's maiden name is Smith, fake. Therefore, my middle name is Smith. My daughter had just graduated from high school, and my parents received a picture of her diploma. When they looked at the photo, they realized it did not have their last name, my maiden name, on it. They were very upset. Given that my husband and I are culturally American but ethnically Filipino, my husband is half, we decided to give her a new name for her middle name and have her hold her father's last name. I was also forced to have a hyphenated last name. Even though I wanted my husband's last name, I conceded on having both names since my parents paid for my education. It's hell to deal with even to this day. EF complained and demanded that I change her name. I told them we are Americans and live in America, including my parents. Therefore, we will use what is culturally appropriate. He told me he does not care about the American way and that I am turning my back on the right, Filipino way. My daughter is already 18 years old. I can't legally do anything regarding her name anymore. I had told him that, but he yelled and demanded I must get it done, not my daughter, me. And I better, or else. Personally, I have a myriad of reasons why I don't want my daughter to have my maiden name. A lot of issues such as FAFSA, schooling, and even inheritance could also be on the line if she were to change her name. Plus, she just doesn't want a different name. My daughter said no, and both my husband and I agree with her. Later that night, she called them and told them, very nicely, that she will in no way change her name. The only reason she would is if she gets married in the future. EF threw a fit on the phone and she ignored him and hung up. They haven't spoken to me since. I want to talk to my parents again, but if they're going to throw a fit over a name and continuously be upset, especially over a name they knew about for 18 years, then I will cut ties. I hope they get their act together. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you